Good. Yeah.
Hey!
Oh, guys, thank you so much for being here. Hi, Quinn. Thanks for being
Happy
here.
to be here.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate this.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Happy to help.
That's really nice. Can we all fit inside?
No.
No?
Anywhere we go.
Stock the hallway.
This is a really important election. We could have the first premier from Yarmouth. It seemed tough these last couple years just with where the party's at, but I mean, things have changed a little bit. I think people have seen what Tim Houston's about with this early election call, breaking his own promise, giving people kind of BS reasons for doing this. This is costing the province $15 million for no real reason. And I'm actually excited to present what I think is a really good plan to people of the province. It's good for Yarmouth. We'll make sure we invest in Yarmouth, don't you worry.
Right.
Dalton, that too.
That's right. Especially the main court. He's the only one that will invest.
So I do think the stakes are high for this area. I mean, I do love that Tim Houston, after 10 years, finally likes the ferry.
Yeah.
I do like that.
Wasn't enough.
But a 1-year extension is a big problem.
Yeah.
Like the rods can't get financing to put the colony back in business. Bus tours can't get on there. It'd be really nice to be premier and sign a 10-year contract with that ferry. That is.
I'm Gary Nickerson,
And I'm Quinn Taggart.
and this is Outside My Window.
And that was the Honourable Zach Churchill recently in Yarmouth to open up his new campaign office for the up-and-coming provincial election. Normally, when it comes to the podcast, we usually don't have too much trouble in getting Zach to give us some time. But, of course, he has to support all 55 ridings in the Nova Scotia election coming up. So we took an opportunity, of course, to jump aboard his campaign bus and have a quick chat. You've been through elections before. This is not your first rodeo by any stretch of the imagination, but this is your first as the leader of the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia. What's different about this campaign compared to the ones you've done before?
Well, functionally, I have to be around the whole province instead of just being here in Yarmouth and connecting with people every day. But that's also exciting because you hear what people are saying in every single community that you visit. And a lot of the issues are very similar to what people are dealing with down here. You know, the high cost of living is on everybody's minds. People realize we don't have to have the highest taxes in the country anymore. Cost of groceries, power bills going up, and on top of, and housing, of course, the cost of housing and availability of housing. Again, these are issues now not just in HRM in the city, but in rural communities from one end of the province to the other. And of course, healthcare, particularly getting family doctors and being attached to primary care providers. So it's tough being away from Yarmouth during a campaign and away from the family, but it's also really eye-opening of how similar the concerns are from one end of the province to the other. And I think we've got a good plan to tackle a lot of this stuff.
No, I mean, a lot of these issues like affordability, housing availability, housing costs, and the like, as well as healthcare in and of itself, these are not short-term wins, but there's got to be some short-term wins that can help move this along. What's in the Liberal plan for that?
Well, we can immediately change our taxes and have fair or lower taxes for people. You know, we've become one of the most expensive places to live in the country. We used to be just over 3 years ago, one of the most affordable. There's been record revenues coming into the province, and we still are paying the highest taxes. So we've got a plan in place that we will implement on our first budget that'll put $3,000 back into the pockets of people. And these changes include taking the HST off the rest of food that people are paying sales tax on, changing the basic exemption in income tax so that people are paying less income tax, and cutting the HST by 2 percentage points. So when you put all of these measures together, that's $3,000 back into people's bank accounts, and will allow them, to have that money to either, spend on the necessities of life, or put towards things that they or their family need.
A lot of people will ask the obvious next question, which is, how do you pay for something like that?
People don't realize that we have the revenue to pay for that now in Nova Scotia. We are not a have-not province anymore. And we could actually afford to do it right now had our current premier just stuck to his budget. So Tim Houston has spent over $1 billion above and beyond his legislated budget every year he's been in office. So there's been $3 billion spent outside of the budget. So if we had just stuck to the budget, like every family household has to do, like businesses have to do, we would actually have the money to provide this tax relief for people. And again, our taxes went up when our population was in decline to keep up with the pressures on healthcare and education. That's not the case anymore. We're in a very different world, and the cost of living is putting incredible pressure on people. Seniors are having a hard time making ends meet. We've got working families with 2 incomes coming in that are being forced to decide not to put their kids in hockey or summer camp. And it's affecting what kind of food people are eating. And those things all impact our healthcare system. So this is about, I think, helping people in a fundamental way, and that's providing some really critical financial relief.
A lot of the healthcare initiatives that I've seen over the years have been reactive. In other words, once you're sick, here's where you are. What do the Liberals plan to do when it comes to anything along the lines of preventative medicine?
Well, that's a big focus of ours because we have to change our approach to healthcare. I mean, John Hamm said in the 90s, you can keep throwing money at this thing, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And people should realize that approximately 80 to 90% of the resources in the healthcare system are being spent in the last 3 months of somebody's life. We have to change that. So a number of things need to happen to do that. People do need to have family doctors and an attachment to primary care providers like nurse practitioners. If they don't, we know that people will have a harder time managing their health and keeping track of the things that matter. We have a lot of health complexities in Nova Scotia, from high rates of GI issues, high rates of lung cancer, cardiovascular issues, diabetes. People do need to have doctors that they can go to, or healthcare teams they can go to that know their file and that can help them monitor their health. That's going to take pressure off of the acute side, the part of the system when people are in an urgent situation, sick or in a critical state. We've got a plan to do that. We're going to build 20 new collaborative care clinics across the province. We've got 20 now. We'll also provide funding to help those expand. People in this area will know the collaborative care clinic in Clare, which has been very successful at attaching patients to doctors. They have, and imagine this in the context of Nova Scotia, where twice as many people now don't have a family doctor than when Tim Houston first became premier. In Clare, they have 100% attachment for people that want a doctor. They've done such a good job in Clare, they're now taking patients on in Yarmouth and Digby. So that's the model that we've got to replicate. Doctors like working in that model. It's more economical for them. It allows them to take on more patients and live a reasonable lifestyle. And patients, of course, love it because they get access to family doctors. So that's key and fundamental. As well, we've got to be better at early diagnosis of certain illnesses and prevention as well. We've got to help people be healthier. I mean, the healthcare system can't just be looking after you when you're at your most critical state. It has to be there for that. But we also have to change the paradigm so that it's also helping people stay healthier for longer.
When it comes to looking at the elections in and of themselves, voter turnout has always been a bit on the decline since way back. I think the highest I remember seeing in some of the historical numbers was in the 60 to 70 to 80% range, but that was like eons ago. In the last while, it's been 50 to 55%. What's your message to the 18 to 24s, the 25 to 34s, which seems to be the lowest turnout percentage, to encourage them to get out and vote in making them understand that their vote really does matter?
It really does matter because government decisions are being made that affect their future. And when one of the critiques I do have about the current government is that he's willing to spend and spend and spend without the Premier Houston, without thinking about the impact on the next generation of Nova Scotians that are coming up, that are going to need health care, that are going to need, roads and housing. And they're going to be inheriting some debt if we're not smart with how we spend our money. But the big issues in Nova Scotia right now, cost of living, affordability, housing, this is impacting our young people in a very serious way. I've talked to young people from one of the province to the other that are actually losing hope on building a future here, on ever owning a home or being able to afford a place to rent. And it's hard to blame them when you look at, rent shooting up 30% over the last 3 years here, housing being incredibly expensive. And they need to know that if they want parties and governments to pay attention to those longer term issues, like climate change as well, they're in a better position if they're voting in higher numbers, because it puts pressure on every politician to talk about those issues that matter and think about policies that are going to help the next generation. We are doing that. I'm 40 years old. I've been in politics for 14 years. I am most motivated by making good decisions, not just for the here and now, but for the long run. And we've got a good plan, I think, that will help seniors with housing options and cost of living, but is also really important for the young people that are coming up, so that they're going to be able to find places to live that are affordable and in the realm of what used to be called a starter home, and be able to trust that they've got a fair rent as well, and that we're going to better protect our coastline and our province from the as we've seen the last few years, the devastating impacts of climate change. So young people care about that too. We would certainly pass the Coastal Protection Act and do a better job than the current government in terms of getting more renewable energy here and reducing our emissions and making sure that we're also better able to adapt and protect ourselves from tougher hurricanes and wildfires and floods.
And we've experienced all of that in the last few years. So it's important, of course, to make sure your vote counts.
Yeah, and we do need governments to be thinking long term, right? I mean, it's people get cynical, I think, on politics because it does seem a lot of the time that leaders, politicians are making very short-term decisions for political reasons instead of making the tougher decisions for the long run. I was part of a government for 8 years that made tough decisions, that took a long-term view, that did a lot of policy and planning work, and we took heat for it because you're not always saying yes to people. My concern right now with the Houston regime is that he'll say yes to everybody and spend a lot of money on things that aren't making a big difference, giving large sums of money to Sobeys so that people get 50 cents 1 week a month for scene points, and on flashy things in healthcare like a phone app and a so-called innovation center, while the fundamentals of our healthcare system fall further and further behind. So I don't like that kind of governing, and I think we can do better. And we certainly have a plan, I think, that will be good for younger voters, working families, and seniors. The other thing I think that I'm sure has made people cynical this time around is Houston breaking his first law on the fixed election date. So, I mean, I've heard people say, oh, I'm not voting. You can't, if we were told there was going to be a fixed election date, Houston's first promise, his first law, and he broke it. Like, what? It's actually driving people away, which I think is a problem. And I understand that cynicism. I feel a bit cynical about it too, to be honest. I mean, there was a lot of fanfare about Nova Scotia having a fixed election date, which is supposed to be next summer. And I think it does generate cynicism when politicians break their word, particularly one that they seem so proud of at the time. And there's no real reason to have a provincial election right now, to be honest. There's no good reason for it. And it's costing taxpayers, $13 to $15 million. Those collaborative care clinics I talked about, Though the operating cost to have 20 new ones a year would be over $15 million. So the same cost as this needless election, just to put that into perspective for people.
I think, in speaking with Premier Houston, the concept that I took away from our conversation was that, he was looking for that longer term mandate than 1 year, similar fashion to what he's done with the ferry by only extending it, that contract out rather than extending it out long term. So with that in mind, if the Liberals form the next government, what does the first 100 days look like? What can you do right off the bat to make an impact?
Before I get to that, he's right. He's being honest about why he called this election, because he wants more seats. And he thinks at this moment he can get more seats, even though he already has a majority government. So I do think it is more about what he thinks is in his best interest than the province's or people's interest. And it's another reason why I don't trust his word on the ferry. I mean, we would sign a 10-year contract. I mean, that's a long-term solution to this ferry. Even the study that this government has done demonstrated that there's tens of millions of dollars in return to Nova Scotians that's brought in new money to our province. And we've, of course, been saying that for 14 years here in Yarmouth and the tourism industry and our party, as Tim Houston attacked the service and told everybody it was a waste of money. And it needs more than a year extension to the contract. The problems with only extending it for a year. Listen, I'm happy about that. I'm glad he's turned around. I mean, this guy at one point said he was going to get rid of this thing, so there has been a change in how he's looking at it, which I do appreciate. I'm thankful for. But I also have some trust issues around, and primarily because it's only been a year extension to the contract. Like, why? Why just a year? You just had a report that said this thing brought in $20 million in new economic spending. Why not sign a long-term contract? And the reason people need to know why that's really important. Tourism operators can't get financing to do work on their motels or hotels. The RODs will have a hard time getting financing from a bank to put into the colony to get it reestablished and reopened because of a 1-year contract. The banks want to know there's a long-term contract. It impacts how many people are coming over here. Bus tours book 3 years in advance. So they're not going to book if there's just a 1-year extension to the contract. So we're actually losing numbers on the ferry as a result of this. And I've tried explaining that to the Conservative members who are involved with this file. I mean, because it's Conservatives all up the South Shore now. They all know how important this is. And I told them all, it's like, listen, politics aside, this is a good deal. This study, like every other study, like the Department of Tourism's biannual study of this thing, shows that there's a big return to Nova Scotians on the money that's invested in it. And in order for us to really maximize the return on that, we need a long-term contract signed. So hopefully, if Houston's still the premier, that eventually happens. If I'm the premier, that contract will be signed in the first week.
And I think that, if you look down the road of which way that it's going to fall, we saw what happens when people take the revenge vote. When we ended up with Darrell Dexter, that was a complete nightmare for us here in Southwest Nova. Do you think that maybe what's happened with our neighbors in New Brunswick is going to have an impact on the voting strategy here for folks as they go to the polls?
Well, what was very clear in New Brunswick is Blaine Higgs tried to set the provincial election up very similar to how Tim Houston has set this one up, pretending that it's about Justin Trudeau and the federal government. It's not, by the way. It determines who the premier is. It determines, who's leading the province. It has no impact or bearing on who the prime minister is or how the province can deal with the federal government. I don't think Houston's been very good at dealing with the federal government to date. I don't know what's going to change if he gets more seats. But what we learned in New Brunswick was that voters are smarter than Blaine Higgs thought they were. He tried to trick them into thinking that a provincial election had something to do with Justin Trudeau. They saw through that, and they voted a majority Liberal government in under Susan Holt, who is a lovely person, a caring person, who doesn't play, BS political games, but is in this for the right reasons, to serve and to help people. And I think there'll be a segment of the population in Nova Scotia that's going to see through that here provincially. I hope, because it's not true. It's a ridiculous assertion, and I think Houston will benefit from another segment of the population that is just feeling really negatively toward the federal government. I think a lot of Nova Scotians will think, well, actually, this is about the direction of the province and where we're going to go. And we have a plan on our team that, if I'm Premier, will implement, that I think is really good for people. It'll put more money in people's pocket. $3,000 in the tax changes alone. It's a reasonably good plan to tackle the housing crisis, ensure we have more housing built, but also more housing built that people can afford. And I think it's a smarter approach to healthcare. We're not going to throw money at the wall and on flashy things. We're going to put money in the fundamentals, getting people family doctors, and I think over the short, mid, and long term, it'll be proven to be a much better direction than where we're going right now.
Historically, and we'll end on this, Zach, because I know you've got a bunch of different things going on today. Historically, party politics, I mean, if you go way back, the dividing lines between party politics were extremely divisive, right? Conservatives over on this side, Liberals over on this side, or whichever the case may be, and the policies were very, very different. But over, the last years, evolution being what it is, a lot of the concerns of the general populace, as well as a lot of the policies that have to be put in place, there's a lot of overlap now, and there's a lot of muddle in between that dividing line. Do you think maybe it's time for party politics to take a walk in the park and we govern Nova Scotia by consensus?
There are problems with the party system. I am thankful that in Nova Scotia, all three parties crowd around the center, so you get more policy-related disagreements or debate or disagreements on funding, as opposed to big ideological differences, which are much more divisive for people. If they think that one party or the other has a polar opposite value than their own, that becomes a more, I think, dangerous sort of politics. We're seeing that in the States, of course. It's happening more on the federal government as well. So I like that in Nova Scotia. We all crowd around the center and have, more policy disagreements than ideological disagreements for the most part. But you do need a way to govern. You do have to have something that ties people together, and the party system, when it's working at its best, brings people together around values, policies, and platforms. So that allows you to have a group of people that can actually, form a government, make decisions, have an agenda, and implement it. So there's not, despite the flaws in the system, I'm not aware of a better option right now. I think we can make changes within our system that would improve how parties work together and incentivize them to work together more. If you look at countries and jurisdictions that have more of an emphasis on the popular vote than just on seats, you do see a lot more collaboration and work between parties, because they have to work together. But here one of the issues with the party system in our system is you can have a majority government and 60-something% of the seats in the legislature, and only have 30% of the vote. So I think that's certainly a flaw, but it's less to do with the parties and more to do with the system itself.
I know there's been a move afoot to change that system. Where does that stand now?
We have to look at it. I mean, listen, people are getting frustrated with how government works. People are frustrated with the parties and the people in them. but the real issue is the system. I mean, we're all a product of the system that we work in, and we have to look at, I think, changing the system so that it better serves people, and so that politicians do have to keep their word and not treat themselves as being above the law. So things that we've said we would do so far on that front, which I think would give more people confidence. And this came directly from Tim Houston breaking his first law, which was the fixed election date, and sending out a campaign style brochure that landed in mailboxes the first week of this election. That was paid for by the taxpayers. I don't think that's right, and I don't think any government, mine or with my party, if I'm premier, should be allowed to do those things. So we would bring in a ethics commissioner, like they have in Ontario, that would have power and answer to the legislature, and they can point out when there is a breach of ethics, because the premier has a lot of power, and you do have to make sure there's a checks and balances there. We would also give the Auditor General more resources to audit over budget spending, untendered contracts, and ensure that the privacy commissioner, who is there to protect people's personal information, has more power too. So these are really important offices that can help improve our system so that less sneaky stuff happens at the highest levels of power in the province. So these are some changes we've talked about, and you may just hear some more that we have on how we can improve our system so that it better serves people, and that you don't have political gamesmanship running the show. You actually have an agenda that's there to serve and help people.
Final thoughts?
I'm excited about this election. It was unexpected because, of course, the premier had a fixed election date, but I am loving the opportunity to present an alternative to Nova Scotians, and a government that is not focused on our own political interests, but have a plan that can, again, give more money back to people so they can afford to live, build housing that makes sense and that's affordable for people, and help get people family doctors again so they can better look after their health and take pressure off of our hospitals and our emergency departments.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you, Quinn. Appreciate it very much.
I'm Gary Nickerson,
And I'm Quinn Taggart.
and this has been Outside My Window.